Another functional character that can be found in a litter of pups is the observer. These individuals are naturally shy, nervous, suspicious individuals. So if we do have this dog as a functional character, what we really need to focus on is making this dog more independent, focusing on this dog's confidence. It's really important that we understand this functional character, how we really need to slow things down for this individual, and really how we have to understand the importance of desensitizing. Compared to other individuals in the litter, this dog is naturally shy, nervous, suspicious. It's not too dissimilar to the guide. It tends to be stood away as we go in to view that litter of pups. But unlike the guide, who's looking very aloof, snob-like, and disregards us, this individual really pulls our heartstrings. It stares at us with what I describe as those big, wide Disney eyes that we see in those Disney movies where a little tear is going to form. It might even cower. There is definitely an understanding that this individual looks a little bit scared, a little bit uncertain, a little bit fearful. But it pulls on our heartstrings. And what happens is that we look at this dog and we fall in love with it instantly. We put our hands to our mouth and go, oh, look at this poor dog. No one can love it more than what I can. I'm going to take this dog home because it's clearly not happy with the environment that it's in. Now that's not right or wrong. We just have to have a realization and an acceptance that it's not the environment that that puppy is not happy in. It's the fact that as a strange human, we have come into that dog's environment and the dog has a wariness about us already. The job of the observer is to naturally be one of shy, nervous and suspicious character. It tends to be a little bit more on edge in comparison to the other litter mates. And that's because its function is very, very important. Its function is to be able to quickly, sharply and succinctly identify changes in smell, movement, noise, to be able to find predators, rivals, dangers and threats that might be around and starting to place threat on the group composition. So for example, in this picture here, we can see the observer. It's not too dissimilar to the meerkat that stands on lookout, or in a flock of geese, that one goose that is on lookout while the rest of the geese are feeding. The same principles apply. Whilst all of the individuals in the group are preoccupied, the observer is on lookout, watching, smelling, hearing for any dangers or threats that might be around, and that might jeopardize the survival and safety and life of those individuals in its group. So this is why its natural character tends to be quite jumpy, tends to be quite scatty, tends to be quite nervous and suspicious. And that's why, as a general rule, for all functional characters, but most importantly this functional character, I always say that if we are buying a puppy or even a rescue dog, it's better to do this in the spring or summertime. Now, why is that? Well, as a zoologist, as a biologist, I always like to work with nature and learn from her. We know that young animals are born in the springtime. We know from a biological perspective that's because there's a lot more food around, so it increases the chances of that offspring surviving. That is true, but there is also plenty of daylight around. Plenty of daylight, so young animals that are vulnerable, that are inexperienced, that need to be desensitized to lots of different stimuli can do so in daylight. In daylight, when things don't cast shadows. In daylight, when objects don't look scary. When we have a lot of daylight on our side, we have a lot of desensitizing on our side. I think this is important for all functional characters, but it's very important for the functional character of an observer, because they're naturally shy, nervous and suspicious. What we want to do is find opportunities that support that individual, that iron out and smooth out this nervousness, this anxiety that's going to be naturally part of this dog's functional character. We want to work on improving and building this dog's confidence. We want to work on this dog being able to be more independent, because certainly this functional character is going to struggle with separation anxiety. It's an individual that's going to struggle being on its own. Now let's again take a scenario where we might get this functional character in the winter time. We might again read our dog training manual that says in order to toilet train a dog, we need to put that dog outside as soon as it's awoken, straight after play, or as soon as it's eaten. But we might read that book and it might be 8 o'clock at night and we might already be in our pajamas, and we take a look outside and it might already be snowing or there be sleet, and we look at our little pup and we look at ourselves and we look at the back garden and convince ourselves, tell ourselves, it's okay because it's only the back garden, so nothing can go wrong there. And we take our young pup and put him outside in the back garden. And we wave from the warmth of our house, from the patio doors, waving at our little puppy going, go on, go to the toilet. And this little puppy, of any functional character, but for this example, our observer. This little puppy who's shy, nervous, suspicious. This little puppy who should never ever be left on its own in the first place and is a very important part of group composition. Our pups are young, weak, vulnerable, defenseless animals. So no pup should ever be left on their own. But in this example, this little puppy is now sat or stood in the garden, in the dark, in the cold, unsupported by an adult, unsupported by comfort or an individual who has confidence to know that that space is safe. And this puppy absorbs all this stimuli, all this sensory information about its local environment. But because this dog is naturally a shy, nervous, suspicious dog anyway, it learns that these sounds, these smells, these sensations are an issue for that dog. So what we do actually is end up fueling and feeding the dog's anxiety, feeding that dog's shy, nervous, suspicious nature, rather than working on desensitizing those stimulants for that dog. So often what we'll see in Observer is that they're typically a barker, not a once or twice barker, but the beautiful machine gun that we see in dogs. Now, of course, most dogs are going to bark, but what can happen is that we can get the difference between an observer that we feed this shy, nervous and suspicious nature and behavior, or one where we can calm down, smooth out and iron out these natural characteristics, these natural behaviors that we want to dissolve and we want to dissipate. So yes, we are still always going to have an observer, but we have taken it through, but we have allowed that dog to learn in its own time. We have worked with that dog's fear, anxiety and shyness slowly, supportively, and in daylight, and in a season where there is plenty of daylight on our sides. This dog is going to require a lot of desensitizing and a lot of socializing. Again, if we have this functional character in the wintertime, just like any other functional character, most people in the wintertime are more reluctant in being your experiment, in being your desensitizer, in being your person that you can meet at 5 o'clock in the park so that your dog starts to get used to different environments, different conditions, different stimuli. So again, season and time of year that we are getting this functional character is important. But from a desensitizing perspective, time of year is important for all functional characters. Now, I also said it's important for a rescue dog, and why is that so? We might get a rescue dog that's any functional character. We might get a rescue dog that isn't necessarily a puppy, but a much, much older dog. Regardless of whether we get a puppy or a rescue dog, when that dog begins to live with us, it is still a rebirth. For me, there are certain behaviors that we're going to offer that dog. We're going to work with that dog and we're going to provide for that dog, regardless of whether it's a young pup that we're bringing home or a rescue dog. At that moment in time, the dog is with new people, a new environment, new sounds, new smells, new stimuli. So there's a protocol that I put in, and I'll talk about this more in the life stages section of the course. Given an observer's shy, nervous, suspicious nature, this is when maternal affect comes into play as well. A shy, nervous, suspicious dog, if allowed to be bred from, is going to produce shy, nervous, suspicious pups. So their functional character is really important to support the group composition, but this would be an individual that is not a reproducer. And again, this is where we can have breeding conflict arise within our group composition. So like I said before, we can teach dogs anything. With a guide, they learn really, really quickly. With a follower, we have to have a little bit more understanding, patience and acceptance. With an observer, we have to slow things down even more. Whereas with a guide, we might be able to jump from 1 to 5 to 10, With an observer, progress is a little slower. Or you might have to go 1, 1.1, 1.2. Can we get to 1.3? You want to go back down to 1.2? Okay, that's fine. So again, depending on our functional character will mean the pace at which we can teach our dogs, how quickly they can be desensitized to something, and how we protect them and safeguard them can vary from individual to individual, based not only on their functional character, but certainly functional character is important. When it comes to looking at functional character in group composition, I'm going to tell you yet another story, and one this time that's relevant for the observer. I was called to a house where other professionals had gone to see a dog, and all the advice that had been given about this dog, how to teach the dog, how to train the dog, how to work with the dog, was not wrong. It was just that we needed to bring in the concept of functional character and group composition into the equation as well. When I got to the house, it was quite clear that this dog was an observer. I didn't have any more information to offer than the advice that they'd been given, except the concept of functional character. A functional character that is going to really support an observer is a defender, a guide, even possibly a follower. But what I wanted to bring in for this household was a defender. Now, my advice for them wasn't to buy another dog, because of course that would bring lots of the things that they'd have to factor in, and that wasn't the issue here. But what we did discuss within their local environment, the concept of trying to seek and find another dog where they lived, a dog that showed qualities of a defender, and it just so happened that they thought someone in their village had one. So we went across to the human guardian. We spoke to them about how we'd want to work with them, how we want to get the dog to interact with the observer. And that is what we put in place. The struggle that this particular dog had is that it didn't want to leave the house. Sometimes it was even scared to go in the garden. The lady had tried all sorts with other professionals in a very fair, kind, positive and calm way to be able to interact and exercise with this dog outside. But the dog does not want to leave. We found this dog that lived local to her. We brought the dog into the garden, and the observer that coexisted with the lady in the house was really excited. She shut out the back door and started to play and show appeasing behaviours and interact with this defender. We thought, let's give it a shot. We put the lead on the observer. We got the defender to go outside the front door. The observer was straight out there as well. So long as that defender was around the observer, this observer would walk for miles. But try and get her to walk on her own, and she wouldn't. Now that is quite an intense example, an example that is quite rare, but certainly emphasises the importance of functional character, when it can be important, and when we may choose to play around with the functional characters and their purposes to support another individual. And I hope this is really showing to you the importance of understanding group composition and why functional character is really important to understand in terms of supporting our dog's wellness and understanding them as the genetically ancient canine that they are and continue to be living in a modern day world.